Hello, this is Cascade, and welcome back to the Way Door. Been away for a little bit, but I am back. Been having a lot of family time and really enjoying that. But we just celebrated 250 years of freedom in the United States of America, and that was really special. It's a great place to live. It's not perfect, but no place on earth is perfect because we live in a fallen world and it's fallen because of sin. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about really what true freedom looks like. And I want to start with a passage from Second Peter, and obviously this is Peter who wrote this, and it's taken from Second Peter chapter 2, verse 19. And he's really addressing these false teachers that had come into the church at the time and were spreading false doctrine. And then he makes a statement in Second Peter chapter 2, verse 19. He said this: they promise freedom. He's talking about these false teachers, but they themselves are slaves of sin and corruption. For you are a slave to whatever controls you. This is from the New Living Translation, which I really like. Um, I usually read from that. I do my study from other more word to word translations. But let me read that again. He's talking about the false teachers. They promise freedom, but they themselves are slaves of sin and corruption. And now listen to this: for you are a slave to whatever controls you. So these false teachers, it's mentioned here in verse 1 that they are false teachers of Second Peter chapter 2. Verse 2, it talks about them being evil in their teachings. Verse 3, it talks about greed. Verse 10, it talks about sexual immorality. It talks about them despising authority. Verse 14, it talks about them adultery. So these people are coming in and teaching false doctrine, but Peter is really saying to the people there that are in the church not to listen to these guys, because these guys, again, chapter 2, verse 19, they are slaves of sin and corruption. For you are a slave to whatever controls you. And so verse 219 is really just saying to us and to the people at the time that, like Bob Dylan once said in the past, you can serve the devil or you can serve the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. So true freedom is found only in a relationship with Jesus. Now I want to turn my attention to John chapter 8, which is really a fascinating chapter. Um, it's probably one of the most vivid examples of who Jesus was and why he came to the earth, why he left heaven itself to come down and share with people. And it was really there's three different issues I think that are going on here in John chapter 8. Number one, Jesus was really trying to explain to the people who he is. He keeps using this "I am" statements, and we're going to look at that in just a little bit. And that comes from Exodus chapter 3, where Moses is dialoguing with God, and he's asking God, who should I say you are? And God's response was, "I am who I am." So that was one of the issues I think Jesus was trying to address here in John chapter 8, and was who he was. A second issue that he talks about is freedom versus slavery. And the third issue is either serving God or serving the devil. Now, in John chapter 8, Jesus is talking to the religious leaders. These are the guys that supposedly have all the knowledge, and they did have all the knowledge. They were religiously trained, but they weren't really in a relationship with God. They were very legalistic in their teachings and kind of arrogant. And we're going to see what Jesus has to say to them. And it must have been shocking during the day when Jesus was talking to these people, some of the things that he told them. So Peter tells us that these false teachers, these people that are really fighting against God, they are slaves of sin, and you're a slave to whatever controls you. Now we get to Jesus, and he's talking to these people. And again, he's talking about who he is. He's talking about freedom versus slavery, and he's talking about serving God or serving the devil. And we get to verse 34, and Jesus simply says, I tell you the truth, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. So some of the same things that Peter had said in his epistle in Second Peter chapter 2. So Jesus says, I tell you the truth, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. And then verse 36, here we have the contrast set by Jesus. And of course, he's talking about himself as being the Son of God. They didn't understand that at the time. But verse 36 says this, Jesus speaking here, and he says, if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. So Jesus is contrasting sin versus himself. Like the contrast is, if you are a sinner, which everyone is, you are a slave to sin. And we're going to see what that really means in the end. But Jesus says he has come down to set us free from the bondage of sin. Now, in verse 58 and 59, Jesus is going to talk a little bit about who he is. And I want to get to that portion right there. So, uh, this is kind of the end of the chapter here. This is the end of the chapter, and Jesus is really talking to these religious leaders, trying to get them to understand who he is. And Jesus says this because they were talking about Abraham being their father, the religious leaders, and Jesus said, "No, that's not really who your father is." I'm going to get to that next. But here's what Jesus had to say at the end of John chapter 8, starting at verse 58. Jesus answered, I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was even born, I am. So he uses that same uh, title for himself that God used when he was talking to Moses at the burning bush. And then verse 59 here of John chapter 8, this is what happened. The people obviously recognized what Jesus was trying to say because here's what they did. At that point, they picked up stones to throw at him because Jesus was hidden from them and left the temple. At that point, they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus was hidden from them and left the temple. So they wanted to stone Jesus. They wanted to kill him. So Jesus told who he was there at the end of the chapter. But before that, he's in a dialogue. These people are saying our father is Abraham, and they were accusing Jesus of being a devil himself. And but we get to verse 43 through 47. I want to read this here to you. And here's what Jesus had to say. Why can't you understand what I am saying? It's because you can't even hear me. For you are the children, now listen to this. For you are the children of your father, the devil, and you love to do evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So I tell you the truth, you just naturally don't believe me. Which of you can truthfully accuse me of sin? Since I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Anyone who belongs to God listens gladly to the words of God, but you don't listen because you don't belong to God. So, pretty harsh statement there. So, really, what we're saying here is that um, are you truly free? And that is my final question to you. Um, are you living in true freedom? Because you are a sinner. You're born into a world of sin. That is your natural state. So what are you going to do with that? You are a bondage and sin, and you can't do anything to rescue yourself. So it's either freedom in Christ to enjoy true life, true hope, true joy, and true love, or it's being bound as a slave throughout eternity, separated from a holy God. Not a very positive ending there, but that is the reality of what true freedom versus true slavery is. So this is Cascade signing out for the Way Door. Thank you for tuning in. Again, as always, if you have any comments or question, please send them my way, and I will do my best to address them. So Cascade signing out, and I hope your day and your week is a blessed one.